Okay, thank you for coming back, taking your seats. Thanks in advance. Okay, since we are together for the last time, this is the last day of the conference, and in the afternoon we have separate parallel sessions. There are a couple of things that I would like to talk about, and this is not going to take any time away from Arsalan, so so we might be we might end a little bit later, we might have a little bit less time for lunch, but we can eat fast. So the first thing that I want to mention is that there are two things actually that are related to our business meeting. The first one is choosing the next place, the next location, and there was some, I don't know whether or not I should call it a mistake or something that we should have programmed and scheduled it a little bit better. For me, the assumption was that there was only one university that had expressed interest to host the next NISO, and I didn't know that Toronto was interested as well. So I put only half an hour, scheduled only half an hour to discuss this issue. If I knew about it earlier, and maybe I should have asked about it, we would have, I would have had more time scheduled for this, maybe an hour and a half, whatever it takes, and maybe we would choose another procedure, like different type of voting to do that. So I'm saying this, so I know maybe next time you should ask in advance who is interested in something like this. So I'm sorry about this, but my fault. I take responsibility for that, and I hope we are going to correct it next time. The other thing that we were going to talk about on the business meeting was publication of the proceedings, and we didn't have time because we got into hot discussions, hot argumentations, and so I'm going to email people who were here later on and hear your voices as to how to go about to publish the proceedings of this meeting. My own feeling is that tendency is that to find a publisher that we can have everything online so that people who are in Iran, linguists in Iran, can access those publications as well. So we have done some inquiries about that. Nothing is definite yet, but I'm going to be in touch and we can all talk about it and see what you think. The last thing I want to mention is that a conference of this size cannot be scheduled and done by just one person. So there have been lots of different people, specifically graduate students who have, I had the help of 24 graduate students. Nope, so that's another thing. So when we started schedule,
she's offering your services.
When we started scheduling and programming everything, that was more than a year ago. So I would really like to thank the graduate students who are on the organizing committee. They have been working very hard on this since then. That was April or even March last year. So Roya Kabiri, Jengang Gui, and Brian Walter Smith, and Jonathan Geary. So all four of them are students from Linguistics department. You were great. You have been great. So thank you. Who's not the student, well, she's an assistant professor in the Middle Eastern and North African studies, and she teaches Persian in the Persian studies, Center for Persian Studies, that's funded by Roshan, actually. She has been very helpful as well. I don't know if she's here, but if she's here. Thank you, Nadia. So when we were approached from Iran to live stream and the program, I didn't know what to do. And then I asked Andrew Carney, who's sitting here, and he told me to talk with Gregory Anderson, who was a graduate student. I mean, he graduated from our human language technology, and he is now working for our university in the, what was the name of the program? You are very technologies team, something like this. So he's working for that. So I contacted him and I said, well, something like this, can the university do something about this? And he said, yes, if you have volunteers to help, then I can actually lead the work. And he has been great leading everybody, but I want to give a huge thank you to our HLT students who are in our human language technology program, who have been great. They have been working very hard for the last 6 months to do this, and they have been here every day. So the names, Damien Yukio is here, Angela Hughes, Mohammed Al-Shawari, and Patricia Lee. Please. I would also like to thank our photographers, Ahmed Al-Sheri from Linguistics, and JR, let me see, and JR, you also from Linguistics. JR, where are you? Okay, here. And also, Aliya Mahim from Middle Eastern and North African Studies. And finally, we have 13 other students who from Linguistics and also Middle Eastern and North African Studies who have been helping with registration, with giving rights to people and all kinds of things. So a huge team has been helping with us. And a big thank you to my colleague Heidi Hardy. Is she here? Okay, I can see you, there's light behind you. So now I am very happy and delighted actually to introduce you to the last keynote speaker in our program, and I owe him an apology because he was scheduled to give a talk yesterday. But then because Noam Chomsky, we wanted to schedule Noam Chomsky's talk because it was politics at the end of the conference, so John with linguistics and then politics. But they couldn't do it today, so it had to be rescheduled. So I'm sorry that it is so late for you. So as I said, it's really a pleasure. I have known Arsalan for a very, very long time. I will give you some personal stories about that as well. So Arsalan received his PhD from the University of Toronto in 2004, and then he worked as an assistant professor at the Syracuse University from 2004 to 2010. Actually, got a job immediately after his graduation. He's now an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. So he has published articles in many different areas. His dissertation was basically about the interface between syntax and phonology, which turned, he has an LT paper on that one, and he published a volume on that. And since then, he has moved on, and I mean, keeping that in the back of his head, he has worked on other subjects as well, like the syntax of noun phrases, WH question, second position clitics, the adopter construction, and agreement in copula clauses, and some other issues. So he's also a PI on an SSHRC funded project that's titled The Syntax of Non-Linkers, and co-PI on another one that's called Popular Agreement Systems, Locality, and Domains. So the personal issue. I met Arsalan, I don't know, a million years ago, when he was a graduate student at Tabatabai University. I was invited as a keynote speaker at that time, so you see my age, how much younger he is. And then a few years later, when he became a graduate student at Toronto University of Toronto, we were invited to go to Iran and give some talks at Iran University, at Tabatabai University, and Isfahan. So there were 3 faculty members. It was Vida and Gila. So the 3 of us, and there were 3 graduate students who were invited. Arsalan was one of them, and guess what? Karim was another one. And there was one other student who was not in Iran. So we went to Iran. That was the most memorable trip that I had. And he was, as a student, he gave talks both at Tabatabai University and also in Isfahan, and he was very well received, and so we knew that he would be named someday. So that's, I mean, it's especially a special pleasure for me to be able to introduce him today now as the keynote speaker of this conference. So the title of his talk is the CP-vP Parallelism, Evidence from Some Iranian Languages. Please join me to welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's truly an honor for me to be a keynote speaker at this conference. But given that I'm the last keynote speaker, I think I'd like to take a moment and on behalf of all the participants, thanks Simin and also to the team for organizing this wonderful conference, like 3 days of really amazing talks, and then party at your house last night. It was just unbelievable. I mean, the bar, you said, I went to Anoop later and said, look at the bar, like she's raised the bar. What are you going to do? And he said with confidence, watch us top it up. So we are watching Anoop. So we are watching Anoop, but sorry if my glasses are weird, like it's not a new fashion. I just, it got unscrewed and the screw is lost and everything, so I'm gonna have to deal with it. But basically, in terms of what I'm gonna say, I'm gonna start my timer just so I have a little bit of a sense what's happening. Is that, as you can see from the title, is the CP-vP Parallelism and Evidence from Some Iranian Languages. So I'm going to draw, when I say CP, by the way, I'm talking about anything about the little VP. Don't think of just the periphery, but anything in that region. And so I'm going to look at, basically, we're going to look at a few phenomena and projections, essentially, which typically have been seen as being higher up in the clause. And I'm going to suggest that they're lower in some Iranian languages. And the most controversial word here is probably some. Some, as you probably know, means more than one. And in this case, it means 1.5 for me, because basically what we have is Persian and Armenian, which is not an Iranian language, so maybe half Iranian. But the reason I'm going on and saying like evidence from Iranian languages is because I'm pretty sure, I know, a lot of things I say can be extended to quite a few languages. So there's nothing really too special about Persian in these respects, though not all of them are going to be the same, obviously. Basically, that's what I'm going to talk about, and there's 3 areas we're looking at. The first one, which I'm going to actually pretty much skip, it's from older work in the 2000s, WH questions in Persian, where I argue that the WH questions in Persian is sort of in the VP domain. And then very briefly, again, probably mostly skip my work with joint work with Karin Megerdumian on Eastern Armenian second position clitics. And then I'm going to spend most of the time on something that's much newer, and that's the syntax of negation in Persian. And I'm going to argue in 3 steps. Basically, first I'm going to talk about nominalization in Persian, and I'm going to show that the domain of nominalization is the little VP. Then I'm going to show that negation can be included in that domain, and as a result, it has to be VP internal. And then I'm going to review sort of the literature on why it has been suggested by other scholars that negation is actually high. So we're going to have a quick look at that domain and see where that's coming from, and review how we might be able to revisit those proposals. So the Persian WH questions, pretty much skipping. You can move on actually to the second section. By the way, I thought everybody would have handouts, but it doesn't look like they have been copied as far as we know. So you will have to look at the. I think
we're on it. They're bringing the handouts.
Oh, they're bringing the handout. Okay, great. But it's good that we have this option, so at least you can have a look at the examples. So basically, looking at a set of examples which where at least in colloquial Persian, you would have the arguments or adjuncts post-verbally. When you have a question, then they have to be moved to a pre-verbal position. And I've used that, and also looking at focus and sort of where it is, looking at manner adverbs and so on. Essentially coming to the conclusion before section 2 that Persian has this position, which is VP into edge of the little VP. It's a focused position which WH questions move to. The second section, which is about second position classes, again, I'm going to just looking at 6 quickly. So Karina and I looked at the distribution of this Armenian auxiliary, Eastern Armenian auxiliary, Western Armenian doesn't have it, and showed that basically, it shows this is sort of a schema where it can appear. If there's a manner adverb, it will be after the manner adverb. If there's no manner adverb, the non-specific object. If there's no non-specific object, preverb. As you can see in this pattern, it's obviously a second position, phenomenon. But the second position has to refer to something that is different from what we're mostly used to, which is second position in the CP domain. So again, we see a phenomenon where something that we're typically seeing as referring to the CP domain is referring to the little VP domain. And again, this is Armenian, but yesterday we heard from Sorani Kurdish very clearly you have a second position in VP. And the example I have in 7 is from Laki, which has a very similar distribution. In this respect, the other issues are quite different. Well, yeah, very different, but in this respect, very similar to Sorani Kurdish. And you have this kind of second position in the VP domain. Now I'd like to quickly switch to the syntax of negation, because that's the newer stuff, and that's where the rest of my talk is going to be basically on. So, as I said, I'll do this in 3 steps. So first, I'm going to argue that look at nominalization and say that nominalization is actually applies to the little VP, and then show that negation can be included. So as a result, negation has to be included in the little VP, and then argue that what about the other proposals in the literature where typically negation in Persian has been taken to be above TP. By the way, I'm talking about the syntactic position of negation. Nobody would say the morphology is like there. Obviously, the morphology is on the verb. Everybody sees that. And as we'll see, there are mechanisms that people propose to account for that morphological realization. So when we talk about nominalization, as you know, in much of the recent literature, especially going back from Borsday and Kornfield's work in 2000, so nominalization structures are treated as mixed extended projections. So where you have sort of a verbal domain to a point, and then you have the nominalizer coming in and giving you the nominalized structure. And typically a key question in this kind of approach is, where does the nominalizer come in? At what height does it come in? So Kornfield and Whitman in that volume, in their introduction, have this kind of typology. They say, sometimes it's a little VP. They give Dutch and Italian as an example. the famous English pause ing gerunds are taken to be nominalizations at the TP level, and then for Greek and Polish they suggest that it's actually at the CP level. So in light of this kind of framework, we're going to be looking at Persian to see what's happening with Persian. So just before we do that, I mean, it's a little bit odd maybe in this context because most people know Persian or know enough Persian to know this, but in case there's a non-Persian speaker here who doesn't know the order of things, these are the kinds of elements we're going to look at. I'm just giving you a clause with some stuff in it, which you're going to be seeing in the rest of the talk. So you have the speaker, you have the subject, you have the speaker-oriented adverb, you have the manner adverb, you have the non-specific object, you have the negation and the past tense and so on. And basically, we have this deverbal nominalization form, which we know as masdar. Sometimes people call it long infinitive in Persian, which is formed by attaching this nominalizing suffix and attaching it to the what is traditionally known as the past tense. Karina and I, in some older work, have argued that this is actually not a past marker, tense marker, it's actually an spiritual marker, but it's really tangential to what I'm talking about today. So you get something like khordan for eating, khundan for reading, didan for seeing, and so on. Thank you. So handouts are here. So looking at more data, you realize that in fact this nominalizer can attach to structures that are bigger than just the verb. So if you have something like cake khordan, kitab khundan, the nominalizer is attached to something that includes the verb and the non-specific object. One might say, well, you know, how do you know that it's actually attaching to the whole thing? Maybe it's attaching just to the verb, and this thing is maybe a complement, a modifier, something, some kind of dependent of that verb. But we know that if you have a situation like that, you would need the ezafe. So if you want to say, you know, eating of the cake, you would have to say khordane cake, khundane kitab. So it's really not that that we're dealing with. It's actually attaching to the larger structure. In fact, the existence, the presence of ezafe in this language makes it a little bit easier for us to do something that would actually very clearly show us what the domain of this nominalization is. So essentially, you know, you can add an adjective after the nominalized form or a possessor, which would have the ezafe. You can put a demonstrative before it. So basically, you can find a frame where the demonstrative, the plural marker, or the ezafe show you the two boundaries of this nominalized form. So every time you're dealing with a structure that's nominalized, you can put these around it just to see exactly how that works. And you can see that in the next example, like 12. So you can have something like in cake khordan ali. So we're using the structure we had in 10 and just putting it in this frame. In cake khordan ali, this cake eating of Ali. In kitab khundan ha, these acts of book reading. Some of the translations might sound funny in English, but in Persian, you know, the phrases are fine. So the examples we have in 10 and 12, the domain of nominalization has the verb, a non-specific object, but you can actually add more stuff to it. You can add a manner adverb to this domain, as we can see in 13, in sari kitab khundan Ali, which again shows that the manner adverb can be included in the domain of nominalization. I've tried to give you the parallel version. Sort of if you nominalize the verb only, you would have to have something like khundan sari kitab tawassut Ali is the closest parallel you would give. But really, what we're interested in this talk is 13a. So if you try to add other stuff, it looks like that's as far as you can go. You can't add anything else to this nominalization domain. So in 14, what I've tried to do is to actually add speaker-oriented adverb like khoshbachtane, fortunately, and then it's ungrammatical. In khoshbachtane kitab khundan ali is really bad. What's interesting in Persian is that Well, in general, in this generative literature, going back at least to Jackendorf, we all know of this, distinction between higher adverbs and lower adverbs, and the fact that you can use the same lexical item in different positions with different readings. The famous examples of Jackendorf and then later Cinque and so on. In Persian, like intelligently, whether it's manner, if that's at the end of the sentence, it's manner, but if you put it just after the subject, it is, it can have either, and it's ambiguous between a manner reading and subject-oriented reading. In Persian, you don't get the difference with order, but what you get is with stress. This is something I've talked about in my thesis and monograph and so on. But basically, so in 15, if you say Ali sakhavatmandane komak kard, it means he helped generously. It's a manner reading. But if you say Ali sakhavatmandane komak kard with the prominence, with the main stress on komak, then it's this subject-oriented reading. It was generous of Ali to help. What's interesting is that if you put that in the nominalized frame, then the only reading you get is the manner reading. In sakhavatmandane komak kardan Ali can only mean this helping generously of Ali, in the best translation I could give, and not this generous act of helping by Ali, which would be sort of the subject-oriented reading. So basically meaning the fact that say that he donated a lot of money. That's what it would mean, the reading. And not that it was, it was so nice of him to help at all or something. So then again, trying to try things that are outside the little VP, and this is following, something similar that a similar test that McGinnis used for Georgian. If you use a specific object, which has been argued by a lot of people in this room, that it's actually outside the little VP, they're moved there or merged there. In these cases, you can see that you can't actually nominalize it. So you can't say in kitab khundan Ali. It's like really bad. Like you just can't do that. Also, you can't have a subject as part of this. So you can't say something like in Ali bastani khordan ha, or to mean these acts of Ali eating ice cream or something. There is, of course, the discussion in the literature that the problem with this is like you can't have nominalized structures including the subject and then the nominative case. You would have to have a genitive case, but there's no way you can make it work in Persian. I have a footnote about this. Even if you try the ezaf, there's no way you can put a subject in that kind of context. So the crucial point that I want to make is that, well, you can include sentential negation in this domain. So you can have something like in kitab nakhundana, in sari ghaza nakhordan Ali, in sari ghaza nakhordan Ali moro badbakht kard, something like that. So, or kheli kar khubiye. Okay. So basically, if negation can be included in there, then I would conclude that negation is low. It has to be low to be part of this little VP. Okay, moving on to the next section. So now I want to say, okay, this sounds straightforward, but let's see why people might say that negation is actually high in Persian. So we can't just leave it there and say that's it. So we have to go look at stuff, the other works in the literature. And the example I have in 20 is just a repetition of 8, just to show you that this is the order that you get. So negation, obviously, in terms of order, it looks like it's very low. And also, you can't, it's not like it's a constituent negation and the real sentential negation maybe somewhere. You just can't add another negation somewhere else. That's a footnote I have in 5. There's no way you can actually make, put another sentential negation in there. It is a sentential negation that you see. So what have the previous accounts done? They've mostly taken negation, I mean, the ones that I established ones take negation to be above the TP, and then they have mechanisms to get the morphological realization of the negative marker in the right place. So, for example, most prominently, Aziza Salagani, it's great to have her here with us today. I think probably has done the most comprehensive work on negation. And she gives us a structure like the one that is shown in 22. For an example, like 21, علی این کتابو نخرید. I might have modified it a little bit as if you see something that's slightly different, but just to make it fit with my talk. But the basic idea is that negation is high, and there's an agree relation with the verb. There's a neg feature on the neg head. There's an agree relation with the verb, which is realized as this negative marker on the verb. But negation itself is syntactically high. So Quack has a very similar story, just slightly different in detail, but it's very similar in nature. So before we look at why Taliban suggests that, let's have a quick look at what it would mean for our nominalization story. To make that structure work for the nominalization story, what you would need to do is to allow the TP to be formed, then the neg to be merged, the relation to be established, and then take the little VP and nominalize it. So it would be countercyclic, it would be a violation of the extension condition, and hopefully, you'll be convinced that it's really unnecessary as well, in addition to being, in violation of these principles. So basically, the most crucial reason that Azita uses to suggest that negation has to be low is because of these elements, like each gas and each gas in the subject and object position, but crucially the subject one, which she calls NPI. And she says, well, as an NPI, it requires a C-commanding neg head. And because you can have it in subject position and subject times spec TP, the negation has to be above spec TP. The issue is that elements like each gas, nobody in Persian, should not really be confused with English type NPIs. And that's, I think, what's key in this discussion. Persian is a negative concord language. And the best way to understand these elements is as N-words, a very unfortunate term used to me like neg words or something like that. But that's what they call it. It's not my term. I'm going to call them H words, which is probably much nicer because all of them have H in Persian. So basically, negative concord languages, just for your information, well, you probably know, but they're divided into two kinds, strict and non-strict negative concord languages, and Persian is a strict negative concord language. What that means is that regardless of where this N word is, you require a negative marker to license that N word. Because in non-strict NC language like Italian, if the N word is in the subject position, then you don't need negation. And in fact, the N word in subject position can itself license another N word in an object position, which is an indication that, it's like really acting like a negative thing. So that's that. But Persian is a strict negative concord language. When you first look at it, you might say, well, it looks like a typical NPI because like an NPI, it's semantically non-negative. In other words, it's not Hitchcast that's giving you the negation of the clause. It's really the negation marker that's giving you the negative. So, which is the same as in that respect, it's like an NPI, an English NPI. Yeah. But when you look more closely, there are differences between the English type NPIs and H words or N words. So N words require sentential negation or similar expressions, debatable, unlike NPIs, which can be licensed by a C-commanding negative quantifier. So in English, you can say no one saw anyone. You cannot do anything like that with N words, not just Persian, Greek, other languages that have it. And importantly, an issue that Dennis, by the way, a lot of things that I'm saying, you also said it, so but not everyone was there, so apologies for the repetition. But NPIs can be licensed long distance, as you can see in the translation of 24. But the Persian one, you can't say Ali naguf kasan hichi khort. Right? You can't do long distance. You can do it with subjunctives. That's not just Persian. That's also in other languages. Subjunctives. We can talk about what that means, about the domain, and so on. But it's sort of tangential to what I want to talk about. But crucially, with an indicative, you can't do it. But in English, Ali didn't say Hassan ate, that Hassan ate anything is perfectly fine. And a crucial test that is used in the literature is the fragment answer. So in English, with N words, in a question like who was here, Kim Jong-un, you can say Hichkas, right? But with, you can't say anyone, like the English type NPIs can't act that way. Looking at that example, you might say that, whoa, wait a minute. So this really looks like a negative quantifier, but N words are not negative quantifiers either. Right? So they share the similarity with negative quantifiers in allowing this kind of fragment answer. But for one thing, negative quantifiers like the English no one don't have to appear in a negative context. You can say no one came. And also, when negative quantifiers are used in the context of sentential negation, you get you get the interpretation that we call like double negative. This you have to have the right dialect to actually have that. Some people use it kind of like have a negative concord dialect of English. So but in the other dialect, this would be if you said John didn't see nobody, it's not the case that John saw nobody, right? So that has double negation. And then negative quantifiers can license NPIs, as we've seen before. No one ate anything, but N words can't license NPIs, with the exception of non-strict in negative concord language. But in strict negative concord language, they can't license NPIs. So then the next question is, how are these things licensed then? And there's extensive literature on this. I've been reading a lot in the past year or so. And there are basically three general analyses of this. Trying to see in terms of timing. Am I catching up? Because I was 10 minutes or so behind now. I've caught up for 7 minutes. So I think it went too far in my the previous page. Yeah. So there are three general approaches. One is, in fact, indefinite analysis, which goes back to Larousseau, which would treat them pretty much as NPIs. And we talked about why that would be an issue, the differences between English type NPIs. And then there's a very influential agreement analysis by Zijlstra. Zijlstra takes N words to be semantically non-negative, which is fine, but they're non-negative indefinites for him. And what he suggests is that the N words have an uninterpretable neg feature, which has to agree with an interpretable neg feature high up in the clause. So the negation marker is not the thing that licenses. It's actually, there's this null operator, null neg operator high up, which licenses this. And the negation marker itself has an uninterpretable neg feature, which gets licensed by the same null operator. So the issue with this is that, well, then why do we really need the negation marker at all, right? If it's licensed by that. And of course, it doesn't end there. He has ways of getting around it, but that's one of the problems that has been raised about that kind of analysis. And of course, the other one is, well, why can't we have this null interpretable neg feature without anything? Why do we need anything else? Uninterpretable feature at the lower down, right? So you would have a negative clause without an actual negative marker. There are other reasons that we'll see that this approach doesn't really fit the Persian data, But the one that I'm going to follow is Giannakidu's approach, who takes n-words as universal quantifiers, where these universal quantifiers have to outscope the negation marker either overtly or covertly. So maybe there's a QR that's needed in some cases to get that kind of scope relation. So she talks about several properties of these n-words, each words, and we're just going to quickly look at that for Persian to show that they actually fit the same properties that Giannakidu talks about. So one of them is that we've seen before, they have to be licensed by a local negation. They can't be long distance. So they're clause bounded, which is again something that Dennis talked about the other day. So universal quantifiers are known to express existential commitment. The idea is that universal quantifiers in general have that property. And for example, they can't be combined with unicorn. And it looks like n-words have that property as well. And she looks at Greek mostly, but other languages as well. And we can see that in Persian, if you say man hiç asp takshafti nadidam, there is some kind of, at least it looks like you're committing to the existence of unicorn. And that's something that's why it makes it sound a little bit odd, unless you believe that unicorns exist, and you're fine. So again, universal quantifiers seem to make good topics, and these n-words seem to make good topics. I've given you an example 27. You can topicalize each phrases. In 28, that's a point that Richard raised in Dennis's talk. The fact that they can be universal quantifiers can be modified by almost and absolutely. So the English example for an actual universal quantifier, Electra was willing to accept absolutely almost everything is fine, but Electra was willing to accept almost absolutely something is bad. Electra wasn't willing to accept absolutely almost anything is bad. But crucially, for Persian, we can see that you can actually modify hichi with mutlaqan or taqriban. Surush mutlaqan taqriban hichi nakhord is perfectly fine. So Giannakidu argues that universal n-words are required to be in a scope position above negation, as they obligatorily take scope over negation, which is in contrast to the idea that they need to be circumvented by negation. So basically, the conclusion I want to draw is that the existence of each words in Persian cannot be taken as an indication that negation in Persian is high. But a crucial argument which I owe to Julie Goncharo for asking me to test this comes from nominalization again. Interestingly, these each words can appear in the nominalized domain. So the negation that's in the nominalized domain is really the syntactic negation that licenses this each word. And it can't be anything else. So in hichi nakhordan surush kheli bade. It's perfectly fine. So that is that. So then Faroudi, we have some time, and I think this is important maybe with Roya around, because Roya was talking about this stuff the other day. I can't remember which, yesterday, probably the other day. But so I just think maybe we should go through it. I mean, there's nothing really surprising about this, but it is an argument that Faroudi came up with. And I was on her committee, and I think maybe I was challenging her for high negation. And one of the arguments she actually added to her thesis was this, which is the fact that negation can show up on Bayad. And the argument she made is, well, Bayad, according to Talaqani, is in TP, and according to her, it's in mod P, a modal P, which is above TP. So if negation can go before that, then negation has to be even above TP. But the problem, so the examples like this, which are perfectly fine, Ali bayad berakhse, Ali nabayad berakhse, and it's not about you, Ali, it's just the general Ali. We could get there at some point today, but we're not there yet. Give us a few hours and then we'll. So The problem with this argument is that the negation on the modal and the verb are independent. So you can say Ali boyad narafse, Ali naboyad narafse. You can add the negation to the modal and another negation to the verb. So what I'm not. It's not constituent. We'll see why. It's not constituent negation. For boyad, it could be potentially. It could be for boyad, but it's not. So the crucial point is that this is not sentential negation. The sentential negation is a negation that shows up on the verb.
That's the interpretation of this sentence.
Ali mustn't not dance. That's the closest you can get in Persian. But Richard, bear with me, because we have to see the auxiliaries in Persian, how they work more generally. So in order to understand this, I think we should look at modal auxiliaries more generally. And of course, Gila has done work on this, and Susanna and I have looked at it too. But like, take another modal like can, tunestan, okay? So when you take can, tunestan, then you essentially have two independent verbs. They have their own agreement, and they take their own durative marker. من میتونم کیک بخورم، من نمیتونم کیک بخورم، من میتونم کیک نخورم، من نمیتونم. It's like almost like a 6-8 beats for dancing. Maybe we can use this. Sorry? You can do it, right?
I'm saying that I don't have self-control.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so basically we have, in that case, I think the fact that we have the double agreement, two agreements, to me, we can move to the next slide. We can take that to mean that we're dealing with a bi-clausal construct in that case. Now, there is differences in how reduced the lower clause is. Gila takes it to be a little VP, Susanna and I think it's a defective TP, but who cares? There's something that can actually hold negation. Now we come back to boyad. Now what is boyad? I think there are two ways you can handle it. One is to say that, you know what, well, boyad doesn't show agreement, but it does. It has a fixed third person singular agreement. You know, you can't really change it. But one way to deal with it is to take it to be an impersonal form, kind of like the French il faut que or il faut pas que, right? And if you treat it that way, then essentially we're back to the same kind of story. There's another way to look at it, which is what Roya talked about. I don't know if maybe it's based on work of Simin actually. And I also, because of this footnote that she saw from me, that maybe it's an adverbial that has a negated form, like it's an adverbial modal with a negative form. It doesn't make anything different, I think, though I kind of prefer the in-person story. So basically the idea, what I'm trying to show in 34, you can even put it right here. You can say, boyad Ali wa Maryam beraqse. So it's kind of like the fact that it can go here is just because of topicalization and so on. Boyad ke Ali wa Maryam beraqse, it sounds a little bit clunky, but it's not bad, I think. If the sentence gets much longer, I think it gets better. So using ke in that context, I know for some, but I think if you have a very long sentence, it gets better. So what I'm trying to say here is that basically that's not a good argument for saying that negation has to be high. We're dealing with independent negative markers, and negation is not necessarily high based on that. Okay, I've made up the 10 minutes, so now I can relax a little bit. So, I mean, if we have time, we might want to go back to the old stuff, but I think it's okay.
You actually have 11.
Perfect. So the interim conclusion for this one is that essentially we don't have a strong argument for a high negation in Persian, and I think we have strong argument coming from nominalization for a low negation in Persian. But another question that we kind of need to think about, going back again to Dennis's thought, is the scope of negation. So somebody might say, well, wait a minute. So if negation is low, does it always scope low? Or can it scope high? In other words, if a language like Persian has low negation, does that necessarily mean that the scope of this language is radically different from another language? It's an empirical question. I haven't looked at everything, so it could be that there are actually differences arising from this. But the system allows us for having wide scope, like we'll see how. And here I'm following Moscati, as we'll see very soon. But before that, we're going to look at the facts. So what are the facts? With respect to the stuff we've looked at, not everything in the world, because that's just, yeah, drives you crazy. But for now, just looking at the things that we've looked at. First thing I did was to use it in the nominalized domain. So when you say sari ghaza nakhordan Ali, the only reading you can get is negative over manner adverb, right? So Ali's not eating food fast, okay? And not fast, not eating, or, you know, so as if you can, like, you know, his not eating was happened in a very quick manner or something. Like, you can't get any reading of that sort. That's manner adverb over negation. In the context of full finite clause, it's the same. When you have a manner adverb, Ali sari ghaza nakhord, the only reading you get is neg over manner adverb. With speaker-oriented adverbs, I really like to get your feedback. I go back and forth. It drives me crazy. There is definitely the more salient reading, which is speaker-oriented adverb over negation, but I feel like I can get the other one. Then I'm not sure if I'm falling into the manner reading or not. I think I need to have more examples. But at this point, I'm not sure. Well, that's actually this one, the subject-oriented. The speaker-oriented is very clear. So, sorry, I switched to 38. 37 is not controversial. Let's look at 37. With a speaker-oriented adverb, the only reading you can get is speaker-oriented over neg. So it means, fortunately, Ali didn't eat ice cream. It was fortunate that Ali didn't eat ice cream, and not it was unfortunate that Ali ate ice cream. So there's no way you can get the negation over the speaker-oriented. But when it comes to subject-oriented, that's where I was saying that it becomes a little bit tricky. Because the first one is definitely more salient. So Ali Aghanane Bastani Nakhord, it was wise of Ali not to eat ice cream. But I think you might be able to get, it wasn't the case that it was wise of Ali to eat ice cream with some prosody that I can't repeat, but at some point I tried it and it kind of, no?
Not for English, no, for Persian.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. No for Persian, and for English.
Not at all. Ali wisely didn't eat ice cream. It's only the first. It was wise that he didn't do.
Okay. So that's good to note. At least for English, it's very clear. For Richard, does anyone get the second reading at all? No. Okay, that's good for me. I mean, in a way, you might not need an egg raising, but I mean, at least for this case. But I think other elements that might have a different kind of interaction. Looking at Dennis, because I think he's also looking at similar interactions. So anyway, so the account I'm giving is based on these facts. I think we have to find other examples. I promise that it's something we can talk about that for the question period. But if we take these facts to be correct, and the only one that's questionable is this one, okay, so not everything's questionable, this one, but let's say that is possible, then this is the kind of story you'll have. So Moscati says, basically the PF position of negation should be separated from scope. And so he talks about actually low negation, and he says there are two kinds of neg raising in R that you can have following sort of the idea of QR. So there's one that's obligatory. So when the neg is in the VP domain, it obligatorily moves to the edge of VP. So it scopes over everything that's in the VP, and that's exactly what we see here. But as we can see in 2, optionally, you can actually covertly raise it to the CP domain or some higher position to get the higher scope. And of course, when I say covert movement, if you don't like covert movement, say agree, right? Like some agree relation will get you the same result. So it's just a old terminology for something that's some way of doing this. I'm sure you have to have in your system. So if we go with this logic, then basically the obligatory neg raising will give you the scope of negation over all VP internal elements, which is why you always get negation over manner adverbs. And for 38, which is the subject-oriented reading, if we agree, which I don't know if anyone does, but if we agree that maybe it's ambiguous, then you would have to say you need an additional optional NR to get the reading of neg over subject-oriented adverbs, okay? And if you allow for that, then you get both readings. The low reading when it's just to the edge of VP, the other one when it moves higher. And if that's the case, because you can't get the neg scoping over the speaker-oriented adverb, the position has to be somewhere between where speaker-oriented adverb, which is the highest high adverb, and the subject-oriented adverb. So that position has to be there if we have that reading. So basically, the conclusion I'm making here is that with the low syntactic position for negation, you can get the wide scope reading with the right NR. So that's not going to be a crucial problem. So what I've done, I have a few minutes, right, like basically. So I'm going to try to wrap it up.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. So what I've done in this section, I think maybe we don't need to really review this. I think we've said it. So maybe we can move on to the more general conclusion, especially because we skipped the first part. So at least here we can maybe bring them together. So of course the talk was about CP-vP parallelism, which of course finds a natural place in multiple spell-out system with phases. If both CP and little vp are phases. And suggesting this parallel structure, of course, is nothing novel. People have done that over the years, decades, going back, for example, the idea that there's an aspect phrase inside little vp, going back to Travis, which is something parallel to TP in CP. And I think it's assumed by most people, like not everyone, but a lot of people actually assume there's an aspect head lower than little b. With the idea of WH questions and a focus position at the edge of little vp, that's also not new. People have talked about low focus positions in other languages. For example, Hungarian with Horvath and Brody. Jacqueline Kornfeld and I have talked about Turkish having a position like this. Julia Su, in her dissertation at the University of Toronto, looks at a wide range of stuff actually in the little vp. And we have even a suggestion, I don't know if others have suggested this, but I know Cheng and Downing's work with the topic position in the little vp. I've always resisted the idea of that maybe topic can't be in the little vp, but they suggest that it can. So, which again would be yet another similarity between the two domains. Then we look at second position, East Armenian, which is another parallel between the two VP, CP. So then in this kind of view, then the difference between languages that have CP second position and VP second position is just because of where the clitic ends up or where the clitic merges or ends up for other independent reasons. You can end up in second position of one domain or the other. And in fact, even in Armenian, with relation to focus, it can move higher when it's focused. With Karina and I have worked, in another paper on that, which I didn't talk about here at all, even in that section. And then we looked at negation. So the idea is that, well, negation is another projection that can be low in some languages. And I suggest that in Persian, it's actually syntactically low. It's not just the morphology that's showing up. But for me, this is sort of part of a bigger project, which may never get completed because I always get interested in other stuff, but revisiting the clausal structure of Persian more generally. So a lot of things that people take to be high, like khahad, or I think all of these things are spectral projections, low in the VP, they're prosodic reasons, and I think, you kind of have to revisit. And then there's this, okay, and there was somebody who was supposed to work with me to do this, and she gets distracted by other stuff because the non-specific object and all that stuff, complex predicates is not my area, so all of these have to come together. I think the complex tenses are the most difficult to deal with. And also ideally a right branching structure and not something that's actually mixed right, left, stuff like that. But that's, for future. Thank you very much.